Welcome to our YouTube channel, where we dive into the intriguing accounts of biblical figures. Are you ready to explore a captivating story that unfolded in ancient times? A tale of promises, rivalries, and destinies intertwined? In this episode, we unravel the story of Ishmael, the first son of Abraham. A story filled with twists and turns that will leave you pondering the profound implications it holds. According to the Bible, Ishmael is known as Abraham's first son. He was born when Abraham was 86 years old and living near Haran. In Genesis 15, God appears to Abraham and promises him that he will have a son and become the father of many nations. At that time, Abraham had no children, as his wife Sarah was unable to conceive. This caused them to question how the promise would be fulfilled. In Genesis 16 verse 3, Sarah suggests to Abraham that he should have a child with her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, whom she gives to him as a wife. Sarah, who was still called Sarai at the time, gives Hagar to Abraham after they had dwelt in the land of Canaan for 10 years. This practice seems to be common during that time, as Jacob's wives also resorted to it. In this custom, the wife offers a servant to her husband, and any children born from this union are considered hers. This could be seen as an early form of surrogacy. Hagar does indeed have a child with Abraham, and when she becomes pregnant, she begins to despise Sarah. Sarah seeks help from Abraham, and in Genesis 16 verse 4, it states that when Sarah saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Sarah blames Abraham for this situation and mistreats Hagar, who eventually flees. Although Ishmael was legally Sarah's child, this does not excuse how Sarah treated Hagar. A few years later, God establishes a covenant with Abraham, requiring the circumcision of all male members of his household. This includes Ishmael, who was 13 years old at the time. The birth of Isaac, the legitimate son of Sarah and Abraham, further strains the relationship between Sarah and Hagar. The tensions had already begun before Ishmael's birth. In the desert, the angel of the Lord meets Hagar and instructs her to return to Abraham. It is also there that she is told her son will be named Ishmael, meaning, God has heard, as the Lord heard Hagar's distress. The discord between Sarah and Hagar reaches its peak when Isaac is weaned. Sarah, deeply upset, asks Abraham to send away Hagar and Ishmael. Abraham considers Ishmael, the son God had promised him, but ultimately decides to follow Sarah's request. Even after Isaac's birth, Abraham treats Ishmael kindly and questions the need for Isaac's birth since Ishmael could be his heir. Sarah views Ishmael as a threat to Isaac's place in the family and wants to get rid of him. This request to expel the maidservant and her son seems to go against the norms of ancient law. While children of maidservants could be demoted, they couldn't be dismissed without valid cause. Abraham resists Sarah's treatment of Ishmael and only acts on God's command to send them away. This suggests that the action taken was not in accordance with the standards of the time. One may question Sarah's reaction to Ishmael. Did it stem from an action committed by Ishmael that threatened Isaac, or was it simply Ishmael's existence that posed a threat? Genesis 21 verse 9 states that Sarah saw Hagar's son, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. This raises the question of whether Ishmael was mocking Isaac or merely playing with him. Does the term, scoffing, here mean mocking, deriding, or simply rejoicing in the situation? Sarah perceives Ishmael as a rival to Isaac, not because of any specific act he committed, but because of his mere existence. The author of Genesis presents the story of Ishmael primarily to establish a contrast between Isaac and Ishmael, not as individuals, but as representations of God's work. The idea is that when God fulfilled his promises to Abraham, he was not bound by natural and ordinary laws, meaning the flesh. While God's preference for Isaac, the son of the wife, aligns with customary practices, the rejection of Hagar and Ishmael accentuates the contrast. Hagar and her son are sent away into the wilderness. Genesis 21 verses 10 to 14. Hagar insists that Abraham cast out this bondwoman and her son, as the son of the bondwoman should not inherit alongside Isaac. Abraham is displeased with this request, but God instructs him to listen to Sarah's voice and assures him that Ishmael will also become a great nation. Abraham reluctantly sends Hagar and Ishmael away, providing them with bread and water. They wander in the wilderness and face the threat of thirst, but God hears Ishmael and provides them with water, fulfilling his promise to Hagar. Genesis 21 verses 17 to 18. God still has plans for Ishmael and assures Hagar that he will become a great nation because he is Abraham's son. Genesis 21 verses 17 to 18. This prophecy is fulfilled as Genesis 25 verses 2 to 18 reports that Ishmael had 12 sons who became powerful leaders and established a nation. Hagar, who was of Egyptian origin, chooses an Egyptian wife for Ishmael, and they settle in the wilderness of Paran. Ishmael's descendants become known as Arabs, a term that denotes nomads. They live in hostility towards their brothers, fulfilling God's prediction that Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man, with his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. Genesis 16 verse 12. Other people settled in the Arabian Peninsula, including the descendants of Abraham's sons through Keturah. 1 Chronicles 1 verses 32 to 33. Some descendants of Esau, such as the Amalekites, Genesis 36 verse 12, also settled there. However, Isaac remained as Abraham's heir, while Ishmael and Abraham's other sons through concubines were also blessed by him. Genesis 25. This means that both Hagar's sons and Keturah's sons received material goods from Abraham. The Bible does not mention any conflicts between Ishmael and Isaac. In fact, they are described as burying Abraham together. Genesis 25 verse 9. Many of the names mentioned in this context are influential tribal families of that time. Ishmael's descendants, known as Ishmaelites, were organized into 12 tribes living in movable camps in the southern desert. Genesis 25. Ishmael died at the age of 137, but his burial place is not specified in the Bible. Muslim tradition places his tomb at the Kaaba in Mecca. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul mentions Ishmael specifically in his allegory contrasting legalistic religious persecutors with those born according to the Spirit and enjoying freedom in Christ. Galatians 4 verse 21. Ishmael became a relatively common name, and there were other individuals mentioned in the Bible with that name, including a descendant of Saul and Jonathan, a high official under Jehoshaphat's reign, and the son of a priest at the time of Ezra. The most well-known Ishmael in the Bible was the son of Nethaniah, a member of the royal house of David. During the period of Babylonian oppression against the Jews, this Ishmael killed Gedaliah, the governor of Judah appointed by Nebuchadnezzar. Jeremiah 41 verses 1 to 15. In conclusion, Ishmael, as Abraham's son, was not part of God's promise to Abraham, but God still protected him. Ishmael had numerous offspring, similar to Isaac, and his lineage was structured into 12 tribal clans. God characterized Ishmael's descendants as nomadic and predicted they would encounter resistance from the children of the covenant. Over time, Ishmael's descendants became associated with the Midianites, leading to an assimilation between the Ishmaelites and Midianites in biblical passages. Today, Arabs claim their genealogy from Abraham mainly through Ishmael. The Bible does establish a link between the northern Arabs and the descendants of Ishmael. However, not all inhabitants of Arabia are descendants of Ishmael, as Keturah's descendants and Esau's children also populated the Arabian Peninsula. While some modern Arabs may trace their origins to Ishmael, not all Arabs are descended from him. According to the Bible, God made Ishmael into a great nation, and his descendants can share in Abraham's blessings by putting their faith in Jesus Christ for salvation. Ishmael's story represents natural birth, while Isaac represents supernatural birth. The Apostle Paul uses the story of Hagar and Sarah as an analogy to illustrate the difference between the Old Covenant, Hagar, and the New Covenant, Sarah, based on divine grace. Believers in Christ are compared to the child born of Sarah, born of the Spirit and free. Thank you for reading, and we hope this discussion has provided insights into the Bible.